We do this as part of BDO Labs, which works within Runway. And Runway is an innovation hub working with entrepreneurs. And they had the great foresight to recognize this is actually a really big value add to their community. So usually the stuff we do really exists within the Runway community. But given kind of the circumstances and the virtual nature of it, it kind of made sense to open this up to the public and recognize that probably a lot of people asking questions, wrestling with ideas around uncertainty beyond just the Runway community. Working through the questions of what can uncertainty offer us and what does it ask of us, and then kind of what can we do about it. So as we get through, we'll kind of guide, hopefully we'll steer the ship in that direction. But other than that, we'll kind of just open it to let the conversation go and see where it takes us. With that, I think, am I missing anything, Barry? Are we good?
No, that sounds like us. So thank you. Now, I'd say just frame in why this conversation, why now? Like uncertainty. How did that hit our screen?
Yeah.
And then let's get into the content that we want to share and the conversation we want it to flow in.
So Barry certainly had people coming to him asking questions about uncertainty. As you can imagine, I had a good amount of my friends asking me, sending me messages, talking to me about things. And I had the realization that, like, I don't even know, I was like, really needed to talk to Barry because I didn't know myself. I wasn't in a position to give anybody any answers. I was freaked out to some extent by the uncertainty. And I think, like, there's kind of so much to unpack inside of what's going on. So you have there's a medical concern, a healthcare concern. Both my parents are kind of in a susceptible demographic, right? And but then beyond that, there's then the business concerns, what this does to my business, what this does to small business, especially in general. And then that ripples out to this economic impact. And I'm a data nerd. So for those that don't know me, I love digging in the data, and usually that's how I calm myself down. And this was one of the first times in my life that the more I was looking at the data, the more I was like, man, this looks really, really scary. I'm kind of scared. And I wasn't, I know generally things are going to be okay. But I just I'm holding that somewhere in my mind, and I'm not sure how to get my heart there with it to catch up. And so that leads to kind of this fourth layer of concern, which is myself, right? How do I maintain my sanity through this? And my own kind of plans and ideas for how the rest of this year was going to go. I'm sure I'm not the only person on the call tonight. Lots of plans I was very excited about that got sucked into a vacuum as soon as all this stuff kind of hit. And so there's that, but then there's also I tried to get myself back to work, and I recognized I don't even know if my work matters anymore. And maybe that sounds kind of melodramatic, but I just it was how different, how much is this going to change our society? Is this going to be a blip on the radar? Is this going to massively change stuff? And at the end of it, is the same stuff I was working on, a month ago, is that going to matter 2 months from now? And those are the questions that were keeping me awake. And then me and Barry had a conversation, and it was you know what, I think let's have this conversation. Let's open it up to some other people and kind of walk through kind of our process together with some folks, and then also open it up for other people to add in what they got. So I'll know if that frames it in, Barry, or if you.
No, it does. It helps. It helps, and thanks for putting some of the business speak to it. When you said that you don't even know in your work that you were doing what of it will possibly be adjusted or changed through this time. Because I think we're a gathering of entrepreneurs, leaders in our own right, And then we've got all kinds of different roles that we show up in. But the whole world on this scale like we've not seen before is moving into this time of change and uncertainty. So we're stating the obvious, but that's what Damien said so well, that prompts us to say, okay, let's put this into conversation, and what can we know about it that helps one another as we go forward. Our platform inside the Runway community is called Be-Do Labs. If you were to see that spelled out, it would be B/do. It's taking what you do and it's letting it interact with the being of your life. So there's this inward you and there's this outward person that you are in the world. And when that splits, it doesn't help either side of how it is we're to show up in the world. It works in connection with each other. And in a time of uncertainty, there's this pull. There's this pull to either fake or outperform what we're feeling or what we're sensing on the being side of ourselves to be a new kind of uncertainty. So what do we do with that? I've got a word. It comes kind of out of the Latin world, and I think it puts language to it. And it's the word liminal. Liminal is literally where we get the word threshold. So if you're an architect by trade, you can think of a threshold as that which you either enter or exit through a room. And in a house, often the construction of it is that you exit out a room into a hallway, and then you get to choose the next room. And that hallway space, after you've left the threshold of one room, and before you enter the threshold of the room you're going into, that hallway space is called liminal. Now see, that's helpful right there, because we're in liminal space. Mm-hmm. We were jolted into uncertainty by things that we could not control. Doesn't mean that we don't have the capability of planning, maybe even having some control for ourselves, but we are in a context that has just now put us through the threshold of the room we've been living, thinking, working in, and we're more or less in a liminal space. And I'm giving you that word because I think we help each other, especially in a business context, to realize that sometimes business goes through things that it doesn't have language for. Mm-hmm. Or it uses fix-it language or problem-solving language. And for all the good that business does to solve problems, sometimes it leaves you hanging when you're in a space that it doesn't quite know its best skills in or how to navigate. You take a whole business and an economy and you put it into liminal space. And what's happening is our management doesn't look into business alone to find what's a resolve here or what's my next step here. It's actually an invitation to develop for our own professional lives an understanding of within what does suffice, what does return us back to a sense of calm when we're in liminal space. So I want to put that word there because we've left one room for sure, and we don't know what the next room is going to be. And in between, we're trying to figure out, and that's what this conversation is about tonight, is what are some skills that help us there. So Damien, is that a clear enough like framing? And I want to say some things inside of that, but is that tracking?
No, I mean, for me already, just kind of recalling where I've been at for the benefit of the group. I felt kind of my anxiety rise again just thinking about it. And just putting a name to something can be really valuable, just to be able to help us catch like, okay, where is it that I'm at right now? Mm-hmm. And just like kind of the first barely part of the step, walking into this journey around accepting, what's going on, is just recognizing like, man, we've left that room.
Yeah. And if we're just standing in the hallway waiting for that room we left to reopen, that's a problem.
Right. Yeah.
That's what's interesting about liminal space is it's not really, few people go into liminal space by choice. Most of us get, it almost looks like an accident that pushed us from what we were doing where we were. And now we're standing out in the liminal space. And what we don't want to do is to say, well, it's temporary and I'll just be here for a while. Then we'll go back to what was there. But if you stand in the space that's out there, I think what you welcome is kind of an emotional register. You begin to check in with yourself, because in the discomfort of what now is uncertainty, and it could be going on for a long time or longer than we had thought, we begin to need to manage our emotions. And for most of us, because if we're leaders or we have responsibilities for other people that are feeling this uncertainty, we oftentimes don't really process our emotions, because we try to become decision makers or people that need to handle the uncertainty. And sometimes the emotional validation misses in our own life, and therefore in the teams that we're part of. And that's really an important little nuance, is there's a grieving that needs to go on in the hallway. But if you let people grieve, you wonder if you're being a good leader. Or if you start to grieve, you wonder if you're just in a self-pity party. So then often you begin to say, well, I don't have time. The room's going to open up that I left, probably. And these are just emotions. And if we don't allow the emotional validation to happen for ourselves or our team, we're developing a culture that's not psychologically safe. That's going to end up eating our performance down the road. We won't go there now, but that's the value of why being in the liminal time asks us to begin to develop, well, what does it mean if this is grief for me? Like if this is an anticipation of grief, if I can't return to what was, I want to put that name out there, because I think there's some real emotional intelligence. And here's the deal: good leaders don't minimize their emotions or that of their team in order to lead well. But there's tension there, because you want to say, no, we're not supposed to bring our emotions to work. Hey, if you're asking, can you bring your emotions to work or not? They're already there. So leaders don't need to act like they're there or not there, but what is the play of an appropriate way of expressing what it feels like? Because emotions need to move through us, or they get stuck in us. That's when they mess up our strategies and all the plans we have on the whiteboard.
As a leader, you touched on something kind of important to me that, like, I think if I'm honest, right, like part of my process of managing my emotions through this and keeping the train on the tracks is like, I need them to not have emotions right now. The train on the tracks.
Enough emotion.
So like sometimes I go into a default mode of being focused on what they're doing or not doing that I need them to do, instead of, and worried less about what are they feeling.
Yeah.
And so how, if I get stuck in this space, like I'm really focused on like just trying to hold it together, how do I create enough room to like also, have them feel their feelings when I myself have a resistance to them doing that, because I want them to just, I want to believe that they can be robots right now. Like, just keep working, just keep going.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. Yeah, I totally get it. I think the emotional side of our teams is an intelligent way that we have to find our leadership voice in. And our fear is that if we let it open, the emotions will flood our team. We'll end up having a big therapy session. Or HR will have a problem because people will go too far in their sharing, and now we've got weird vibes in the room. I just want to step back off of that, because I think that's the defensive posture of a rigid mindset. I think what leadership for the 21st century is going to require of us is the ability to bring our whole selves, if you will, into that which we do. So I got a little idea that I want to share at this point, because I think it might fit and help me get it clear, Damien. I think if you go way back into how we began to process our sense of life together and our civilizations, we defined two spaces that were pretty important for how we wanted to advance ourselves. And one would be a space called profane, and the other would be a space called sacred. I just hold that for a moment, because I probably need to update that term. So I would think profane is market space. It's where you would find the marketplace. It's where what I built and crafted and made, I would take into, and I would share it, I would exchange it, and I would barter, and I would get the best price, and I would get the most scale, and I would look at what's my piece of the market. And in profane space, I basically am there to transact. And I can measure that. I can know if I had a good day of profit, and I can understand where I am as a leader in a team. It's public. It's the outer space. It's important. And just because it's not called sacred doesn't mean it doesn't have some real high value. In fact, it's as valuable as the sacred, but it's different space. That's profane. So then walk over with me, like leave that room and walk over with me and go into what would be the sacred space. And oftentimes that would look like a temple. If you've ever traveled, some of these older civilizations, actually, this is one of the first things they built together was the sacred. When you go in the sacred space, you don't go in there to do what you're doing over in the profane space. It's different space. And it's different because we need space that's not occupied so much by what we do, but space that helps us to come into the meaning for our lives, our identity, beyond just being entrepreneurs or leaders. We're actually persons. We move into sacred space because we need to reframe the issues that we've bumped into in our work and our marketplace. We need a safe place to be able to go in and to process our life, to listen to our fears. Because when we're in a safe place with our fears, they turn into inward paths that help us to go down and do the deeper work that leadership requires. Like if I'm constantly over in profane space, so I'm constantly in the marketplace, if I'm trying to spend 60 hours of my life, 70 hours of my life, and uncertainty hits, profane space freaks out, and it should. But what it really is, it's a hunger. It's an invitation to begin to understand that there is a sacred space by which I need to be in balance so that I can do the work of awareness. It's where my emotions can be felt. Like real quick, and I'll hand it back to you, but when you walk into sacred space, like remember when you walked in that old cathedral, when you travel down to like South America or over to Europe, or like, it's just, the architecture like goes to the heavens. And the first things people do when they walk into that sacred space is they look up. And of course, in the marketplace, if you look up, you might get ripped off. But to look up is to become vulnerable. You go into sacred space because you're not in control of everything. And the profane market will tell you, stay in control, manage it. Well, that's partially true, but then there's parts of life where you can't get what you need by only being in the profane. So does that make sense? Are those two things they play?
It took me a minute to kind of wrap my mind around, but what I hear you saying is this kind of profane space. I see that as kind of like me with my entrepreneur hat on, or me in the workplace. And it's not that kind of the sacred me doesn't exist there. It's just not necessarily driving the bus.
That's good. That's a good way to say it.
And then we have sacred space, which is like, I think that's probably maybe something I could be more intentional about, right? Like I end up at work, right? Like I'll need to be too intentional about making sure that space exists. It exists, but then like, I need to then make sure that I'm creating space for myself nowadays, right? Like when I do find myself in a temple these days, it's probably I'm on a trip somewhere looking at a very old one. And so creating a temple space for myself to kind of, create balance between that profane space and sacred space, that kind of work self where, the sacred self exists, but then doesn't necessarily drive, and then creating space where my kind of, the part that connects deepest to myself, right? So whether you're, religious or atheist or whatever, just the idea that you're creating space where you can connect to yourself. And in that space, like, the you really is driving the bus.
Right.
And the doing part of you gets to, still be there, but then like not drive the bus, take off the hat for a while.
Exactly. And in times of uncertainty, probably what you don't want to do is manage the uncertainty with more time in profane. You don't want to create a split between the profane and the sacred. I want to show that they need each other and they're of equal value, but they do different things for us. And when you begin to go through the uncertainty we're going through, a lot of us feel that we need the balance to return to how it is we renew, reflect, return to the meaning, get lost in the bigger picture, so that we can continue to show up in profane space as leaders and participants that aren't just part of the frenzy, just part of the overwork, the doubling down of my will to control the situation. It's like, okay, it's an invitation. When I heard it, I see Sandy Miller's with us, and we met through Singularity University, and one of our kind of commencement speakers was Larry Brilliant. And I was listening to Larry give an address, and he started it that night by saying, I've just come, this is Larry, I've just come from addressing the Pentagon, and I was just able, while I was back east, to give the commencement at Harvard. So I'm thinking, oh my gosh, that week I had traveled to Daly City, and I think I would, picked up, anyway, I'm thinking, okay. And he goes, and I have this message I'm giving everyone. So, well, he's got my attention. And he said, I'm just saying that I know of no one who has made a sustainable impact in this world that needs us to show up, that does not have an intentional, robust, spiritual life. And he just dropped it. And he wasn't peddling religion, and he wasn't peddling an institutional form, but he was just saying that if we're going to be leaders, as the world keeps getting complex and change keeps speeding up at us, we have to become people who value practices and means to get into the balance of our lives that I'm using the phrase a sacred space offers us. Now, Larry was the guy that people credited for eradicating smallpox from the planet. So he kind of knows what he's talking about in terms of a long, sustainable direction, right? So I would pause there to say that's what I think is part of what it means to handle our emotional will and not to get trigger happy.
So in what uncertainty is asking of us then, kind of correct me if I'm hearing you right, is to kind of take some sacred space. And we can't just, you dropped the word control, and it immediately pinged for me that I kind of see that as central to that balance, right? In that I'm probably exercising a lot of control in the profane space. I need to be fairly controlled at work, in business. And then in the sacred space is actually not just not exercising control, but actually surrendering to some extent. Yeah. And just like, this is a space where I'm really letting go. I'm actually dropping the control completely.
Damien, that's a great way to say it. One way we know it, one way you know that you are in a practice of that sacred space, is that you lose track of time for a little while. Because we are so addicted to time in the profane space that a sign that you're doing something healthy that you and I were talking about is when you literally want more of it, or you lose track of the time, because it means that you're finally showing up in a different part of your life that is where it's where the wellspring is, I think, to rejuvenate and to generate what you need to have to do your profane work. And it's beautiful, important, profane work we do in the world. So yeah, I think that's the walk away from that point is, what is your list? What is your plan to balance your life for sacred activity that gives you back your life, gives you back a sense of your identity? It calms you in the uncertainty. Like, as a leader, you need to be intelligent, humbly, about knowing what is that for you. And teammates should be able to share what theirs are with each other. And then there should be a collective protective sense that you care for that about one another.
Kind of implicit in that then is that if I'm taking the time to create some balance and take some sacred space, then what? Right? Like, then something's opening up for me. Like, what kind of opportunity then exists within that space, or what kind of possibility am I creating by creating more sacred space for myself, or kind of what then exists beyond that? Is that question making sense?
Yeah, no, I think, I mean, we could all begin to chime in here. We get some of our best ideas when we can't do anything about them. I mean, when you're working out, all of a sudden you get an idea and you wish you weren't so sweaty. You want to go write it down because it finally came to you. Or in the middle of the night, you wake up and you go, oh my gosh, that problem just got solved.
Mm-hmm.
Or when you all of a sudden are profane, you're in control, you're problem solving. You're over here now in a different kind of an intelligence. And things can come to you that you are not available to receive unless you're there for them. So the last thing you want to do is go waste time, because that's what sacred space feels like, or it's vacation time. And in fact, good leaders, according to Larry and a lot of other people, good leaders are active in taking their life into where they can receive things, benefits, directions. And I think that's what we're talking about, Damien. I mean, we can keep naming them, but you look in autobiographics of people that have gone through wilderness or sacred space, and it's pretty amazing the way that they begin to say it's high value. High value is what they come away with. I can go on about it, but I know time's brief, but most people I spend time with, their identity is totally wrapped up in profane. And when their profane marketplace gets uncertain, they lose their identity. They're as rattled as the market. They have, in fact, interfaced to the market to the point if they're not successful over in profane, they really don't even know why they're living.
Yeah, I would argue that makes a ton of sense. And it has to do with, like, if your identity is totally wrapped up in your work, then it's not an authentic identity to begin with. Right?
That would be a good argument.
That totally collapses once, it's
right.
There's a real value then here in what we're talking about in that sacred space, allowing you to kind of get very rooted in yourself and in who you are truly. And so that's the thing that beyond whatever's going to happen, like the stuff I'm freaked out about, I don't know certainly what the market for my business is going to look like 2 months from now, much less 6 months, a year. But I do know kind of what are the things about me that are going to fundamentally stay the same.
Yeah.
And so I can kind of stay grounded in the things I know, the kind of true identity of myself, beyond these kind of external factors that we kind of borrow to define ourselves.
Yeah. Yeah. But I think we've named the value of what's going on there. So I think that's what this space, this uncertainty is asking us, right? It's like, are we going to value that? Is that how we're going to move into the 21st century? But I think it's also giving us something, this uncertainty. I think it's giving us the invitation. Like, it's making something discoverable that we're going to need if we're going to keep evolving. And I think what we're talking about is that there's a update skill that's being forced on us as leaders. I mean, I really do. I don't think we're going to go into the 21st century unless we learn to calm ourselves in uncertainty. And you can't calm yourself if you've got a rigid mindset, if it's non-flexible, non-adaptive.
Yeah, we're getting our software upgrade. It kind of reminds me of like my MacBook and telling me there's updates that need to install, and I just keep saying like tomorrow. And then like this virus hits and it's like, no, the whole world, like you need to restart now.
Right.
And that's actually, speaking of kind of benefit or the kind of opportunity that exists inside this, when we're kind of surrendering to what uncertainty requires of us, is I really think it creates kind of like the opportunity for a fresh start. In that, we get to, all the stuff that so much of the identity and sometimes false identity that we were carrying before is breaking away. So much of our routines are out the window. For some people, it's their jobs, and not minimizing how scary and difficult and frustrating that can be. But even inside that, like, there's so much opportunity to create anew inside the kind of this space of uncertainty, especially like, I think that opportunity only kind of comes present if you're really grounded in yourself, like in this sacred space that you're talking about.
And I think that's that emotional intelligence we're talking about, where you can come in, you're not losing control, you're actually finding your way to navigate through uncertainty. I think a second thing that adds itself to that experience for us moving forward is more cognitive. I think that there is an adaptive mindset that I want to talk a little bit about for leaders.
Yeah.
I mean, we're literally watching our leaders who are on the pedestal shown to us in our news. We're actually watching them either resist an adaptive mindset, which uncertainty requires of us. They're either resisting that, or they're learning, maybe for the first time, forced to have to go there. So let me talk a little bit more plain about it. But learning how in your executive function and your cognitive skills, learning how to be aware and organized, in the midst of uncertainty, is what I'm going to call the cognitive flexibility and the emotional flexibility that you're going to need to have. And if you're not aware of a leader, that you will be changing more than anyone else you know, because you're at the helm, you're at the front headwinds of coming at you, and you have more responsibility on your shoulders to get it right than anybody else. So you're prone to what we used to call knuckle down, or just to stay rigid, to hope things will just bear their course and return to where it is. But that's the rigid, fixed mindset that leadership of the 21st century won't accept.
Yeah.
So it's this adaptive behavioral that comes from my own awareness. Like, what am I doing that's not working for me? And frankly, it hasn't for a while. Well, this is the invitation to step into a development of my own self. That's an adaptive mindset. But what can I see in me, or the trusted peer group around me, that would help me understand what it looks like to go forward into uncertainty? Being aware, and then being able to organize some new behaviors and some new patterns. Is that making sense? So that's the cognitive, because I think we've got some bright people on the call, and it's like, okay, the emotional side, I got you, sacred, and I'm not diminishing that, but our ability to be adaptive that's where the new decisions are going to be required. That's where we're going to be going.
So
that's where we're at.
It reminded me of my time in the military. There's a saying, keep your head on a swivel. And especially like going into, rapidly evolving situations.
Oh yeah.
Keep your head on a swivel. And really what you're talking about is maintain a high level of awareness, and then B, remain flexible, right?
Yeah.
And so be able to kind of change direction at any moment as things are evolving. And so what's actually kind of cool about that is I imagine like some crazy military op is where that's required, but I never really drew the connection that like we're kind of moving into like society is just that way, right? Yeah. Where like life is just is one big rapidly evolving situation.
Right.
So we all kind of need to keep our head on a swivel in a sense, right? Like
it's a good
stay highly aware and remain flexible in what we're doing.
And I think we're aware of that as a group of leaders or entrepreneurs. And by the way, entrepreneurs signed up for uncertainty. This is just like, we just hope to get through it to get to certainty. But the fact is, the more tools that we learn to make us nimble, to adapt new behavioral patterns, and we won't see those unless we're aware of how it is that we're showing up. So like for the leader to say, I don't know, but I'm willing to go find out with you, like that's an adaptive practice that a leader would begin to sound like. Now in modernity, if a leader said, I don't know, people would look at each other and say, why is she hired? Of course, modernity would be, why is he hired? But it's like, it's like the leader's supposed to know, and the leader holds power for knowing. And then the leader can get information you can't at other division levels of the company. So the leader stays empowered by having all the power or by having all the information. The complexity and change that's coming at us, and that this this virus time now gives us a prep up. It gives us a look as to what the future will look like more. And I don't mean gloom and doom by that, but I mean the kind of leader who can be nimble and adaptive. To me, that's what we're looking at. So one of the big mistakes right now is a leader should not, in a time of uncertainty, make a big decision right now.
Right.
Now, an old leader will say, no, everyone's looking at me to know what I'm supposed to be doing right now because they're all panicked and uncertainty. So the old leader mindset says, so I'm going to make a big decision right now to show who's holding the power.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to steady the ship because that's what leaders do. So then you make some big decision. And if you're doing that, you're probably really unaware of some of the things that really are in operation in your need to make a big decision now. Like the smart thing to do in uncertainty is to make several small decisions, one after the other, awaiting that each time you make a little decision, you know that A, something's changing that you've affected with a small decision. Could be small, but it's going to be put into play now. And secondly, is more data is going to come at you in a week or two.
Right.
So I was up in an airplane. This is just a little word picture. It's like a minute or two. So I've never been in a small plane before. My wife told me when we got married, okay, there's like, I love you to death. We made our vows. And then it's like, but there's one thing I'm going to ask you not to do. Don't ever be in a small plane. And I'm like, okay. So years and years later, 35 years of marriage later, a really good trusted friend has a Mooney plane and says, I got to take you up in it and we got to go over Tahoe. And I said, well, I need to ask for that chip. So I get permission, I take the chip and I go up. And I'm up there and there's another guy that joins us. He's also a pilot. He's a Czech airman. And the other guy owns the plane and has been a pilot for years. And they put me in the control and they say, look, why don't you take this thing as we start to hit this plane? We'll turn it over. We'll be right here with you, but we're going to buzz Lake Tahoe. And I am just having the time of my life. The view is stunning and it's a clear day and I'm feeling out of the panic because as soon as they hand me control, I'm no longer just an observer, but I'm actually, if you will, in a place of responsibility. The trip changes for me. Some sweat, some grip. Well, we begin to bank in and I start to feel some wind. I feel some jostling and I know I've got to correct something and I can't tell what it is yet. And that's when one of them said to me, okay, first lesson up here is we need you to understand what it means to make an aggressive underreaction. And that's the phrase. I'd never heard the phrase before in my life. In other words, if you don't do something now, we're all in trouble. That's aggressive. But if you overreact, which is your old pattern, what you used to be aware of is do all you can as soon as you can, then I would cause a bigger trauma and turbulence. Okay. Mm-hmm. So an aggressive underreaction, I think, is what this cognitive adaptive skill is for leaders who then acquire more of the data that comes based on what we've done, what we're going to do next, what we're going to do next. And teams begin to understand that the leader is not just pounding his or her power chest, but is able to say, now this is how we stay together, show transparency, name a process. There is some type of certainty to your process, but you have no certainty over outcomes. But you can share an aggressive underreaction as a process with your team. You can talk about the small decisions you'll make now. And to do that, you're providing some sense of control for the team to monitor what it needs to do as a team while the whole context is uncertain. Does that make sense?
That makes a ton of sense. I think it's perfect. I think that's, actually just such a great metaphor for being able to, I know for me, like I really got that, like aggressive underreaction. I think I've been trying to wrap my hands around that concept for a while, and putting those words to it just really kind of helps bring it down for me.
We have a tool that we think is going to be helpful, and it'll be in a PDF, and it's one that you guys can take. But we thought if we don't model it, and forgive us for making it quick, the tool can take far more time and it will give you more results. But I think the tool could be a helpful way to put something practical into our conversation. Okay. Mm-hmm. So one of the ways that you go back with uncertainty, you don't just get paralyzed with it or try to outsmart it for the future. You actually go back in your story and you find where uncertainty first met you.
Mm.
And you start there. We're not rookies. Something in our past, it's actually been the beginning of prep for the world that is looking for us to show up here. So you go back and you collect it. So Damien, okay, so here we go with you.
Yeah.
So if you had a blank sheet of paper and I ask you to put a line down the center, so you have two columns. On the left-hand side, that column on the left, I'd ask you to go to the point where uncertainty first approached you in your story. And I'd ask you to go as young as you could be. So I have less of your adult cerebral mind kicking in there. Where was it when things felt out of control or uncertainty was encroaching? And I don't know what he's going to say, everybody, so we won't go too long.
I didn't know what I was going to say either, and you framed it differently than how we had originally talked about it. So, no, it's good because it totally made me think of it very differently. So there's two places I can go with it. I think the furthest back, I remember being super, super young and watching my parents argue. Like really argue, and I was kind of underfoot. And I remember a very visceral sense of like,
yeah,
I don't know if things are okay. I don't know, I mean, obviously I wasn't thinking these, I was pretty young. But I would say, like, when you said, when was the first time you met uncertainty? I like got pinged with this sense of like, oh, that was like, that's probably my first memory of how I feel right now. I don't know what the future holds.
No, that's helpful. Okay,
and I'm kind of looking for answers.
Now, so beautiful. So you dial that up. Okay. Now, if we have time in the whole thing, I would ask him to give me words of what it feels like, how it's still witnessed in his body. I would want him to be aware as a leader. Again, we call these things up and sometimes we resist them because we think there's nothing in them, but no, there's a lot there. Your body remembers everything you just told me. And in fact, we'll honor that. Secondly, I'm going to say that there is something that I would use the word trait that you begin to develop because uncertainty was so much your context. So on the second side of that same sheet, on the column on the right, I would ask you to grab, like, what comes top of mind of skills or traits or things that are kind of like authentically yours, almost by survival, but they are yours that you learn to do in order to keep going.
So I'm not sure where it lands, but as you were saying that, it made me think like I became kind of like a fiercely independent problem solver. I don't know if that's like on the side of independence, on the side of problem solving. But I'm definitely, most people who would regard me as a resourceful person. And so I think it's a matter of, taking responsibility to just get things done.
For sure. And if we had time, I'd probably have you.
Sure. Yeah.
And you'd go, okay. Right. Yeah. Okay. And sometimes we move from uncertainties if there's no lesson learned except just to get out of it. And in fact, some of our best leadership comes while we're in it. It's liminal space. It's the most transformational set of skills you probably have gotten. And yet it was when uncertainty was surrounding you. So I'm just noting that. So stay in the exercise. Okay. All right. I want you to turn the page over in your imagination. And I want you to do the same thing. Draw a center line, 2 columns. And again, you will see this in the PDF as an exercise. With that page turned over and the column now on the left, I want you to make a list of which traits from the column that you had on the side you turned from, which traits you want to bring with you as you begin to look at what's asked of your life now in this context. Because some of those traits, right, are just like, okay, enough of those, but the other ones, so what would you want?
My first thought was like, of course I want to bring that with me because we're only really looking at kind of a couple of traits here. But I realized like, actually, no, something I'm working on right now is I don't need to be like the guy who has all the answers. I don't need to be fiercely independent. Look at me, I can take care of myself all by myself. So there's aspects of the resourcefulness Like I like being able to go find what I need and MacGyver something together. But I don't think I need to do that on my own anymore.
Mm, that's
So
beautiful. That's a
yeah,
good picture.
I'd much rather actually, the more we're talking about it, I'd much rather employ that into answers, you know, with and for other people, a community, and allow that to kind of serve my interest rather than doing that directly. I don't know if that's,
Now it makes total sense. 'Cause I think that's the last column, right? The
yeah,
last
right,
column is what trait that you're keeping
right.
from where you've come from. Do you want to move with others? Well, we're all going through what might be change or uncertainty. Like, what does your leadership sound like that's authentic to your story, rather than what did you read in Harvard Business Review?
Yeah, right.
Right? I mean, that's not bad stuff.
Right,
But
yeah.
what you're doing as a leader is you're authentically finding your uncertainty, what it was that it taught you and invited you into, shaking it free of being super independent. And now you can offer it to others in a time of uncertainty. And that's called authentic leadership, right?
Yeah, it's funny because when we decided to do this and use me as a guinea pig, I was like, I don't know if we're going to be able to get there
I know, I know.
in 5 minutes.
You're a good pig. What can we say?
Uh, but you know, as you said that, like how I want, so the last step is how do you want those skills now to be
Right.
employed out in your community? And I realized like rather than people knowing me as like this fiercely independent guy who always can get it done, like I'd rather just be somebody who people know like when they can't get to a resource, like I'm someone that they can call up and I might know the person or I know the requirements around the situation or um, and 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 then I can go kind of show up
Yeah.
in people's lives that way.
I love that picture for you. And that would be adaptive patterns that are true to you, but new patterns that would help you and others move into uncertainty and not freak out. You'd be a calming point. So
Mm-hmm. So if we're kind of bringing it around, what uncertainty is asking of us or requiring us is to create this balance between the profane and
right.
sacred. And in other words, kind of really take some time to cultivate the inner space despite our reactive nature to just like do something now. And then the opportunity that it gives us is really to kind of recreate ourselves within this uncertain time, let go of things that were no longer serving us, and just kind of use that to raise our awareness and stay flexible and aggressively underreactive.
Well said.
So is that kind of bringing that in, Barry?
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of impossible what you just did. I was uncertain you could do it, but you just did it. Yeah, yeah. And I want to keep saying to the group, and then I want to move to the tool. It is not just to get through this coronavirus. We are seeing what leaders are going to need to equip to do for the 21st century with the growing complexity. You guys, a lot of you are already entrepreneurs. You signed up for this. We're not the victim of uncertainty. We have to have the skills and the tools and the adaptive mindset if we want to be counted on and trusted